My teeth were in braces the first time that I got to sit in a Lamborghini. At the time, my dad decided to bring me to a showroom so that I could see and maybe even touch some of the cars that he knew I'd been idolizing for years. After about an hour of ogling the cars, the sales lady walked up to us, and I expected her to thank us kindly for our enthusiasm, but to ask us to leave so some of the real customers could come in and have a chance to buy something. What she did instead was unlock a teal green Murcielago and let me pretend that I could see over the wheel. I'll never forget that day, and that's why it gives me immense pleasure to introduce you to the Lamborghini Aventador lp700-4. Pricing for the Aventador kicks off at right around $404,000. Of course, that includes a gas guzzler tax and that ever-pesky delivery fee. Pricing goes even higher as soon as you start digging into the options list. For example, the car we have here today is optioned out to cost just about $462,000. Under the hood, or engine cover, or whatever you want to call this thing, there's a 6.5-liter V12 engine that screams to over 8,000 RPM, making 700 horsepower and 509 pound-feet of torque. There's only one transmission option, Lamborghini's ISR automated manual, sending power to a permanent all-wheel drive system. Not that you give a damn, but the EPA says that you should expect to get 11 miles per gallon in the city, 18 on the highway, or 13 on average, although, to be honest, I'm not even getting anything close to that. But hey, back to the important stuff, equipment. As you might already know, the Aventador is based on a carbon fiber monocoque chassis. Standard equipment includes 19-inch wheels on the front and 20s on the rear, although you can upgrade to these 20-inch wheels on the front and 21s on the rear, wrapped in Pirelli P0 tires. By the way, the rear wheels on this car measure 355 millimeters wide. Behind those wheels, you'll find a pushrod suspension inspired by Formula One racing and adapted for use on regular roads. Lamborghini is limiting production of the Aventador to 4,000 units, and with a dizzying list of customizable parts, it's safe to say that no two cars will be exactly alike. Despite that, the most striking design elements are pretty much constant. It's unbelievably imposing in person. For some perspective, it's roughly twice as wide as it is tall. Of course, carbon ceramic brakes are standard, and get this, on the front end, they're as big as a Domino's large-size pizza. You can also pay for clear louvers over the engine that act as a showcase for this car's brutal 6.5-liter V12 heart. But my favorite part of its styling has got to be the rear end. It's just unbelievably aggressive looking. And then there's the experience of actually getting into the car. With only 4 inches of ground clearance, you're basically sitting on the pavement. Thankfully, Lamborghini also includes a hydraulic axle lift that'll give you an extra 1.5 inches on the front end to make sure that you can get in and out of parking lots. Now, you might think the butterfly doors are a bit much. Maybe they're too showy, but it's not until you spend a couple of days actually living with a car like this that you begin to realize how essential they really are. Think about it this way. These doors are so long that it would be virtually impossible to get in or out of this thing without knocking them up against something, and you really, really do not want a dent. Inside, there's hardly a surface that you can't customize. For example, this car is wrapped almost entirely in high-grade leather, although if you pay an extra 13 grand, the company will upgrade you to almost exclusively carbon fiber surfaces. As an example, for some of the options included on this specific car, the headrests of the seats have Lamborghini stitching instead of the normal embossment that you'd find on the base car. The headliner is wrapped in Alcantara, and the doors have that diamond pattern quilted leather sewn into them. Some of the styling cues in the Aventador are borrowed from the older and less expensive Gallardo. For example, the switchgear right along here by the screen is all reminiscent of that car, although with a much more modern and updated styling. Now, there are a couple of areas where I'm left scratching my head even with how customizable the cabin is. For example, the door handles are made of plastic, and the rear view mirror isn't auto-dimming, and with a car that you can conceivably spend $500,000 on, should that really be the case? But it's hard to care about any of that when you lift this red switch cover up and press the button that fires up the V12 sitting right behind you. Now, that engine was a clean sheet design for Lamborghini when they set about engineering the Aventador, and in fact it's quite a bit more technically sophisticated than the V12 and the Murcielago that this car replaces. For example, in the least aggressive driving mode, Strada, the car's engine is actually able to shut off half of its cylinders to serve as a straight six. Of course, that's one of the ways that the vehicle aims to save fuel. You also get engine start-stop technology, although the car's computer governs when that's even available, and so far driving, I actually haven't even seen it go off. When you do have engine shut off, though, while you're cruising on the highway, the car actually alternates between cylinder banks every 2 minutes. But speaking of the drive modes, there are 3: Strada, Sport, and Corsa. The Strada stands for street, and like I said, it's the least aggressive mode of the 3 that you can choose from. Now, in Strada, the car is at its most docile, so the shifts happen relatively slowly, the throttle is less aggressive, and more importantly, bypass valves in the exhaust system are closed until especially high RPMs, which keeps the engine quiet, which, believe it or not, is actually pretty nice when you're driving this thing around and you don't feel like hearing the engine roaring all the time. Switch into sport mode and suddenly the car wakes up. I mean, I'm going to push the button and you get the full sound of the engine just ripping right into the cabin, and it really gets more aggressive. I mean, throttle input suddenly much sharper, shifts much quicker, and you just get that full feeling of the car just thrusting forward. Finally, there's Corsa mode, and that's Italian for track. What you get there is the sharpest throttle responses and the fastest shifts that the ISR transmission can deliver. Lamborghini claims it'll change gears in 50 milliseconds. I don't know if that's true, but what I do know is that as soon as you start playing with the shifters, it's almost like you're firing a gun. That's how quickly the gear shifts seem to happen. Now that brings me to my next point. Some people have criticized the ISR transmission for being too harsh, especially at low speeds, and the truth is, it is. The shifts are very abrupt, but only if you leave the car to do the shifting all by itself. If you drop the car into manual mode and modulate the gas and the gear shifts through the paddles the way you would a normal manual transmission, taking your foot off the gas before you shift, the lurching goes away. This thing is expensive, and at that price, you might expect every portion of it to be perfectly smooth. But keep in mind, this is an Italian supercar with 700 horsepower that can shoot to 60 miles an hour in under 2.9 seconds. If smoothness is at the very top of your list, I'm sure the Volkswagen Auto Group would be more than happy to sell you a Bentley. But if you want performance, this is your car. Personally, I'm glad that Lamborghini maintained an element of visceral control in this car that reminds you that you're driving something more than some of the really clinical and self-controlled sports cars that are on the market these days. Instead, you get 6.5 liters of naturally aspirated, high-revving power that's absolutely breathtaking to drive. As the engine speeds up, what's so remarkable about it is that it doesn't just get louder and more aggressive sounding. It's almost like it's a string instrument sitting behind you changing chords. There's an appreciable difference to it that's just awe-inspiring. It sounds nothing short of musical. With 3 years under its belt on the market, the Lamborghini Aventador is far from the most powerful supercar that money can buy. But keep in mind, it's about half the price of a Porsche 918 Spyder. With news spreading that Ferrari is angling towards turbocharging all of its V8s and using hybrid technology heavily in its 12s, all I can say is that I sincerely hope that Lamborghini's future includes naturally aspirated cars as visceral as the Aventador.